Hi everyone, welcome to Security Principles for Certified in Cybersecurity course. This certification prep will help you prepare for the Certified in Cybersecurity examination. In this course, we're going to cover the skills measured in the Security Principles domain of the Certified in Cybersecurity exam outline. You will review the principles of information assurance and security, governance, and risk management. This domain counts for about 26% of the total exam and is the first of the 5 domains for cybersecurity exam. And this also sets the foundation for the other domains to build upon. This course will address key topics related to the security triad, risk assessment, controls, and ethics. This course is also supported by a few other practice question videos, which along with the official Certified in Cybersecurity exam outline document is linked in the description. But first, the basics, as in why do we even need this course? Hi, I'm Avinash. Beginning with what is security? I invite you to think about that for a moment. What does security mean for you? Like, I hear many answers. Positive answers like safety, confidence, trust. And there are others like the guard at the front desk or something that gets in the way of your job. Restrictions and passwords, and then there are the interesting ones like that's not my job. But security is important. It's fun. It's a challenge. Now, we need this course to achieve this. It is essential to establish a shared vocabulary in terms of using it consistently and defining key concepts to a uniform manner, ensuring that all stakeholders have a clear understanding of an industry standard terminology that will build effective communication and minimize misunderstandings. Let's get started with the first module, Information Security Concepts and Governance. Also, I'll now pass it over to my AI friend Ryan to walk us through with the rest of the course. Ryan, take it away.
Thank you, Avinash. We've probably all heard the expression in the past with, when it's nobody's job, nobody does it. That's why this segment is so important. In order to have a good information security program, we need to have governance that allows us to apply the concepts of information security in a good and reliable manner. We can say that governance starts with understanding the laws, making sure that our organization is aware of and compliant with those laws, and that those drive the strategy, the mission, and the goals of the organization. From that strategy, we develop a policy, how we are going to do business, and of course, from the policy, the procedures of the steps that we will actually follow. Governance creates accountability, so someone is held personally accountable, or we could say responsible for something. That brings in the idea of oversight. And of course, when a manager is committed and accountable, hopefully, they also provide leadership so that he or she can make sure that there's direction, provided support. Of course, for the security program. This means that we must communicate. We communicate and support the ideas of policies and procedures. The purpose of policies and procedures is to make the theory of things, like our strategy and mission, real and practical. A lot of this comes down to the idea of information assurance. What is the confidence we have? Well, that comes from doing good things. In other words, when we achieve good practice, we have assurance that we're doing the right things, including providing adequate security for our systems and data. We're protecting our customers' data, our employees, and we're protecting the future of the organization by protecting the confidential information that should be kept from other people's knowledge. We can say that data and information are two of the most valuable assets of most organizations. Their customer lists, for example, and their research. These are all of the things that, in many ways, will determine whether or not the organization can be profitable and successful. We need to protect data. Data, of course, represents anything which is just like numbers or letters. Information is data with meaning. We must protect data all the way through what we call the data life cycle. The data life cycle starts when we first receive that data, then we store it, process it, share it, archive it, and delete it. All the way through, we must protect the data in all forms that it's in, whether or not it's written or electronic. Whether or not it's spoken or video, we protect it in all forms and at all times. So we make sure it's not that it's protected sometimes, but other times it's unprotected. And of course, that means we protect it in all places as well. Data can often end up on several different systems in different departments. It's protected consistently in all of those places. Why do we care about information assurance? Or why do we care about information security? Because we need to comply with laws and regulations. Many organizations are bound by different types of laws and regulations, depending on the industry sector they work in. But almost all businesses are covered by some type of privacy law. Privacy law says we have to keep private, or confidential, information about individuals. A little different from secrecy, which is more about protecting information from military, governments, and the organization itself. Privacy laws often deal with what we call personally identifiable information, information that could be used to identify an individual or, in some cases, that individual's location. We also have PHI, Protected Health Information, which is health information about individuals as well. We've seen many different privacy laws in Europe, like the General Data Protection Requirements, GDPR. We've seen a number of cases in healthcare, where we've got acts such as HIPAA, and in the financial sector, we have laws dealing with the protection and rights to use people's financial data, like the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, for example. In all of this, we want to develop an information program that supports the business goals so that we have assurance that we really are working towards the long-term good of the organization. So what makes up security? The elements of security are people, technology, and, of course, physical and environmental concerns as well. We can say that the end goal of our security program is that we have the right people doing the right things in the right way. We have people that use technology in a secure manner, and that technology is installed and implemented in a physically secure environment as well. A key point to review is the idea that security is here to support business. It is not to constrain or restrain the business, but rather to support what the business needs so it has reliable functions. In this way, we provide assurance or confidence to management that security is helping the business to succeed and meet its mission. We see that security is more than just technology. It's not just about putting in equipment, but having people trained in how to use that equipment and, of course, also having physical and environmental security as well. So far we've discussed things like governance and the elements of security. But in the end, security is a theoretical activity until we back it up with practical implementation of concepts. This is why we need policy procedures, standards, baselines, and guidelines. The idea of a policy hierarchy is that at the top you actually have laws and the actual strategy of the organization as we saw earlier. But these are what feed into the development of the policies of the organization. We could also say that a lot of the policies of the organization are influenced by risk. What risk does our business face? So we develop policies to respond to those risks as well. But policies themselves are high-level statements of what we'd like to do. So therefore we need to take those ideas or concepts of policy and turn them into practical steps through things like procedures, standards, baselines, and guidelines. We also see in this slide we have functional policies, whereas policies themselves should be non-technical and more of a high level. We often need policies specifically dealing with a certain technology, such as a policy about acceptable use of the internet or a policy about some type of remote access or wireless use. Those are functional policies just about that one topic, so we don't have to change and update the overall policy every time technology changes. Policies themselves tell us what we can and what we cannot do, and that way they provide direction for us. We know what's acceptable, what management states is allowed, but in some cases is not allowed as well. A policy is issued by and signed by management to say that this is what we agree to that you should do, and therefore it has authority by that. A good example is an acceptable use policy. If you have internet access, what is acceptable? Some companies say only business. Other companies say, well, any reasonable use. So it depends a little bit on the culture of the organization of what types of policies they create. When we look at procedures, we know the problem with policy is that it's theory. This is what's acceptable use of the internet. But then how do we actually enforce that? For this, we need procedures. A procedure mandates that how something should be done. If a person violates a policy, what do we do? For example, take the example of a new user starts with the organization. We should have a clear procedure in how to set up that new user's account so that all users' accounts are set up properly in accordance with good practice, for example. And these very often are, by their very nature, step-by-step actions. Do this, then do this, then do this. Something we'll look at, especially in Domain 2 when we look at incident response. Here are the steps we take when there's an incident. For example, the overall objective of a procedure is to be the legs or the support for the policy's intent. What was the policy trying to do? And procedures help interpret what that policy's intent is. We also have standards. Standards are good things, so things are done in the same way. For example, we could have a standard that says here is our required solution for anything from equipment. You're going to buy a laptop or a desktop, or you're going to buy software, for example, so that we're all using that same type of configuration and it makes it much easier for us to support it, for example. A standard is often based on good practice, the things we've learned that work. And that, of course, could even be things like an international standard. We have what's known as the ISO IEC 27001. That defines something known as the Information Security Management System. It defines what a good security practice should be. And many organizations have adopted that standard as the template to use for their security program. And they'll even seek to be recognized as compliant with the requirements of that standard. When we look at baselines, we're saying here is the minimum acceptable level of action. For example, you may not have to have a high level of security in the system, but you at least have to meet this minimum acceptable standard. And in that way, a baseline helps to ensure that nothing can connect to our system, which is not at least at that acceptable level. We often use this when we're looking at things like equipment configuration. Any device connected to our network must have, for example, antivirus on it, must have up-to-date patches for the operating system. Those are baselines. We also have seen baselines with something like a minimum password length. Your password must be at least 8 digits long. It could be more. You could exceed the baseline, but no one could have a password that's not at least 8 characters long. We also have guidelines. Guidelines are suggestions. They're recommendations. They're not mandated like a policy, procedure, standard, or baseline is. You must follow those procedures and baselines. But you don't necessarily have to follow a guideline. It's a suggestion. For example, we said before that there was a baseline. Your password had to be 8 characters long. But a guideline could say here's some suggestions on how to choose a good password. Some things you can do to make your password of an acceptable level of strength. You don't have to follow it necessarily, but at least it's good information and a recommendation that could be followed. The key points review. We've looked at some important things here, the use of policies and procedures, because a policy is theory. It's management's intent, but it doesn't necessarily say how to do something. So therefore, the policy is of little value if it's not supported by something like a procedure, which says here are the instructions of what to do and how to do it. We can say here the main goal or main purpose of a policy is to demonstrate that management is committed to certain behaviors as part of their information security program. We started this course off with a question, what is security? And that is a question that's hard for many people to actually answer. Security for them could be based on a perception of what they think security is that's not necessarily positive. And that includes management. Management was raised maybe in an era of finance or marketing or one of those career paths, and now all of a sudden, they have this concern about information security, but they don't even know what it is. So that's why it's good that we have the information security triad. This is often known as the CIA triad, and it really deals with three core principles or pillars of a security program. The first is dealing with confidentiality, the second, integrity, and the third, availability. Because these are terms that management and everybody can understand, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, this allows us to define a complex term like security in a meaningful way. When we look at confidentiality, obviously, what we're trying to do is protect something which should be kept secret from improper disclosure. In some cases, we have to disclose information, but we don't want to disclose information that should not be disclosed. So we're protecting individuals' privacy, such as employee and customer data. We're protecting secrecy, the trade secrets of our organization, for example, our research, and our marketing plans. We need to protect these because if an adversary or a competitor was able to get access to these, it could be that would undermine the future profitability of the organization. The second part of the CIA triad is integrity. Integrity is all about accuracy, not only the accuracy of the data but also the accuracy of the way we process the data. We want to protect our data from improper modification. When we're transmitting data over a network, for example, if there was noise or anything that could disturb that network, could it corrupt the data? Well, then the data is not trustworthy anymore. If a person makes a deposit at an ATM machine to put money into their bank account, they don't want it to be close, but instead it went to somebody else's account, but not theirs. So integrity of the process as well. This means we have to make sure that we don't have unauthorized users able to access or change our data. But we also have to make sure that users that do have authorization can only change data in authorized ways. So certain fields maybe they can't change, but others they could. So what is that idea of an authorized entity? An authorized entity is a person who has been given that level of trust and privilege and is able to access or modify data. And that is often done through a process we call authentication. A person says, yes, I am Joe, but how do we prove they are Joe? Not somebody else pretending to be Joe, what we call spoofing or masquerading. And we use authentication for that, to validate who they are. This is something we'll look at especially in a very important area, that is Domain 3, access controls. We quite often will use multi-factor authentication or MFA. And this means that when a person is going to be authenticated, maybe by knowing a password or having a smart card or an employee ID badge or by biometrics, we don't just use one of those three forms of authentication. We always use at least two of them. So that means we're not trusting just a single authentication technique. If you know the password, well, you must be Joe. Well, we don't know if somebody else has learned what Joe's password is. The third part of the triad is availability. Availability means that our systems and our data are accessible when they're required. Now, some systems' availability is more important than others. Take email, for example. For many departments and most organizations, email is an important communications tool. But if email went down for an hour over lunch, nobody would notice. We don't need 100% availability on something that doesn't require that level of redundancy and protection, but we want to know what systems do need to be available as close to 100% as possible. So availability is the protection of our systems from being unavailable or destroyed, for example. Through things like having backups, making sure that a person is not able to be deprived of access, maybe through something like a distributed denial of service attack, or through something like a cut cable or equipment failure, that now that system's not there when it's needed. One of the ways we address this is through redundancy. Have alternate paths, more than one cable, more than one power supply, more than one backup. So we're able to ensure that even if there's a failure, even in one piece of equipment, we can fail over and run using that other piece of equipment. When we look at the term non-repudiation, this is not really a part of the CIA triad, but it's good to look at it here as well. To repudiate is to say, I didn't do it. In today's networked world, we need to establish who made that order, who made that change so they can't turn around later and repudiate, oh, I didn't do it. So we establish non-repudiation. This can be defined as protection against an individual who falsely denies having performed a certain action. This then provides the capability to determine whether an individual took a certain action, such as creating a new customer record, sending a message, approving something, or receiving the message. This is how it's defined in the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-53, Revision 5. So it's a good benchmark for what is a good definition of what non-repudiation is. In summary, throughout this module, we've set out a foundation for our information security program. We've defined some key terminology. And of course, we know that security requires oversight. It doesn't just happen. It must be managed with a strategy of what we're going to try to do, but then actions to back it up and to realize that strategy.